Welcome, travelers of time and myth, to Forgotten Scrolls. This story is dedicated to you who have ever felt curious about the mysterious warriors of the North. Who were the Vikings really? Were they simple raiders, or a complex civilization full of culture, beliefs, and maritime advancements? Tonight, we will cross icy seas, ancient myths, and battles that marked history together. In this relaxing yet revealing journey, you will learn about the Vikings' origins, their combat techniques, their astonishing vessels, and how they dominated the northern oceans. We will explore their pagan beliefs, their rituals, and how they shaped the world from Scandinavia to Constantinople. You will also discover how they lived day to day, what they ate, how they organized themselves, and what traces they left behind in the world. This story is not made to glorify or demonize, but to understand. Often portrayed as soulless barbarians, the Vikings were also farmers, traders, artisans, and poets. Their culture continues to fascinate even today with powerful symbols, epic legends, and a spirituality that still resonates. Here, you will find no exaggerations, but truth told with respect, beauty, and depth. If you seek to disconnect from the noise of the present and travel with your mind to an era of horns, longships, and ancient gods, you have come to the right place. Each chapter will envelop you with a measured narration, with landscapes, sounds, and emotions that define the Viking world. This experience will help you rest, but also awaken a new curiosity for true human history. So prepare to set sail on this adventure through time. Follow the channel and become a member if you want early access to our next journeys. At Forgotten Scrolls, every night is a doorway to the echoes of antiquity. Now close your eyes. May the roar of the North Sea accompany us. Chapter 1: The Awakening of the North. In the cold peninsulas of Scandinavia, where winters are long and days are short, a civilization emerged that would forever mark the medieval history of Europe. The peoples of the North, later known as Vikings, began their cultural awakening towards the end of the 7th century. In this era, small agricultural communities were organized into clans, each led by a chief or chieftain. Life was harsh, but it was also full of opportunities for the brave. The region's natural resources were scarce, which led these communities to become self-sufficient and to seek new lands beyond their fjords. Fishing, hunting, and rudimentary agriculture were the basis of their subsistence. However, the lack of arable land and demographic growth pushed the Vikings towards the sea. It was there, among the icy waves of the Baltic and the Atlantic, that their expansion would begin. The first historical records mentioning the Vikings date back to 793 AD, with the brutal attack on the monastery of Lindisfarne on England's northeast coast. This event marked the beginning of the so-called Viking Age. From that moment, the Western world began to fear the sails of the longships appearing on the horizon. But the Vikings did not emerge overnight. Their culture had been silently forming for centuries. Viking social organization was composed of jarls, carls, and thralls. The jarls were the nobles and warrior leaders. The carls were the freemen, farmers, and artisans, and the thralls were slaves, often captured during raids. Despite this hierarchy, there was some social mobility, and a carl could become a jarl through combat exploits or acquired wealth. Personal honor and reputation were fundamental values in their society. From a very young age, Viking children were trained to withstand cold, hunger, and pain. They were taught to fight, to row, and to hunt. Women, for their part, played a more active role than in other medieval cultures. They managed homes, lands, and sometimes participated in voyages and combat. In that sense, Viking society offered a surprising degree of equality for its time, although life remained extremely demanding. Nature shaped the character of the Norse. Snow-capped mountains, dense forests, and untamed seas were the backdrop of their daily existence. This deep connection with the environment inspired their mythology, their music, and their way of seeing life. Adversity was part of destiny, and facing it bravely was almost a spiritual obligation. There was no fear of death, but of oblivion. Oral tradition played a vital role in the Viking cultural awakening. The skalds, poets of the era, recited sagas and epics that kept alive the memory of their ancestors. These stories spoke of heroes, gods, monsters, and battles, but also of difficult decisions, betrayals, and loyalties. Words held power, and collective memory was the clan's soul. Not all Vikings were bloodthirsty warriors. Many were skilled traders, intrepid explorers, and expert navigators. From Iceland to Byzantium, their trade routes spanned almost all of Eurasia. The awakening of the North was not just an explosion of violence, but also of knowledge, exchange, and development. They were as pragmatic as they were brave, and they knew how to adapt to every culture they encountered. Art and craftsmanship also flourished in this period. Objects carved from bone, wood, or metal displayed a unique aesthetic with geometric motifs and mythological figures. The Vikings crafted weapons, jewelry, tools, and vessels with admirable skill. Even their writing, the runics, Futhark, revealed a complex and symbolic worldview. Each rune was more than a letter. It was a concept, a force. Religion, politics, and war began to intertwine in the fabric of Norse society. Chiefs were not only warriors, but also spiritual leaders and judges. Assemblies called things gathered freemen to discuss laws and resolve disputes. Unlike other feudal cultures in the Viking world, the community had a voice, and that strengthened their internal cohesion against external challenges. Viking expansion was, in many ways, a natural response to the limitations of their environment. Far from being mere invaders, they were a complex civilization with a robust social structure and a strong identity. The awakening of the North was not a sudden event, but the result of centuries of evolution. When the world finally saw them arrive, they were already ready. This awakening not only changed the history of Europe, but also ignited a cultural flame that remains alive to this day. The image of the Viking remains a symbol of strength, courage, and freedom. And although often distorted, it continues to inspire entire generations. Thus began the era of the men of the North, with firm roots in the icy land and eyes fixed on the maritime horizon. Chapter 2. The Art of Viking Warfare. The Vikings were not an organized force like imperial armies, but their way of waging war was feared throughout Europe. Their main advantage was surprise. They attacked quickly with brutal precision and withdrew before reinforcements arrived. These Norse warriors knew no fear, for they believed that destiny was written by the gods. Death in combat was not a tragedy, but an honor. Their most representative weapon was the broad-bladed, long-handled battle axe, designed to break shields and armor. However, they also used swords, spears, and knives known as sea axes. Each weapon was handcrafted and decorated with runic symbols, considered to offer magical protection. Hand-to-hand combat was their specialty, with fast, strong, and precise movements. The round shield was a key piece in their defense. Made of lightweight wood reinforced with iron, it allowed them to form a shield wall, a defensive tactic used in more organized battles. When they advanced as a single unit, striking in unison and protecting themselves with discipline, they could overcome even numerically superior troops. Order and instinct combined in a deadly way. War attire varied according to the warrior's wealth. The wealthiest wore mail shirts and iron helmets with nasal protection. Others wore only thick tunics, leather armbands, and simple helmets. Contrary to popular myth, Viking helmets did not have horns. That image was created centuries later in 19th century opera and romantic literature. The Vikings were also skilled strategists. They knew the rivers, forests, and hidden routes of the lands they plundered. Their attacks were planned during the summer months and began at dawn, taking advantage of fog and silence. Many monasteries and coastal villages fell without resistance, as they did not expect to be attacked from the sea. Speed was their most powerful ally. They did not just attack on impulse. Often, their campaigns were led by experienced military leaders. One of the best known was Ivar the Boneless, who led the Great Heathen Army in England. These Viking chieftains combined ferocity with intelligence and knew when to attack, when to withdraw, and when to negotiate. In some cases, They preferred to obtain tribute rather than raise entire cities. Internal discipline within warrior clans was strict. Cowardice, disobedience, and theft among comrades were punished. Loyalty to the leader was absolute, and individual honor was constantly tested. Ritual duels called holmgang resolved disputes directly and bloodily. It was not just a matter of pride, but of survival within the group. In addition to open warfare, the Vikings also practiced the art of siege. Although they were not experts in building large siege engines, they knew how to adapt their tactics. They dug tunnels, used fire, and blockaded supplies to force fortresses to surrender. Sometimes they kidnapped religious leaders or nobles to force surrenders. On other occasions, they simply burned what they could not conquer. Their reputation was a weapon in itself. Over time, many cities preferred to pay them tribute rather than risk confronting them. This practice was known as Danegeld and enriched many Viking chieftains. The mere threat of their sails approaching was enough to sow panic. Thus, even without fighting, the Vikings subjugated entire peoples through well-cultivated fear. On the high seas, their combats were equally brutal. Longships were boarded, and warriors jumped armed onto enemy decks. They fought relentlessly with war cries invoking Odin and Thor. Naval battles were not frequent, but when they occurred, they were spectacles of chaos, blood, and courage. Maritime supremacy was key to their regional dominance. The Vikings also trained from childhood. They used wrestling games, mock battles, and strength competitions. These trainings not only forged strong warriors, but also made them resistant to pain and fatigue. The extreme climates shaped their character, and the constant threat of death kept them alert. It was not an easy life, but it was a life chosen with pride. Over time, some Viking leaders became kings and founded dynasties in conquered lands. But even then, the art of war remained the core of their culture. They fought not for empty glory, but for land, riches, and the promise of a place in Valhalla. The battlefield was their altar, and war, their path to eternity. Chapter 3. Navigators of the World's End. The Vikings were, above all, masters of the sea. Their vessels, the famous longships, drakars, were marvels of naval engineering for their time. With light yet sturdy structures, they could navigate both the open sea and narrow rivers. These ships were propelled by oars and square sails, allowing for speed, maneuverability, and stealth. Each longship was built with precision, using selected woods and advanced techniques like clinker building, which overlapped the hull planks for greater flexibility. The design allowed them to approach the coast without needing a port. They often arrived unseen, disembarked silently, and attacked by surprise. Their silhouette, decorated with dragon heads, instilled terror from afar. The Vikings did not fear the horizon. From Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, they ventured in every possible direction. In the west, they reached the British Isles, Ireland, and France. They crossed the North Sea, defying storms and currents. Sailing was an essential part of their cultural identity. The sea was their path, their border, and their challenge. They also explored Eastern Europe via great rivers like the Dnieper and the Volga. These riverine routes led them all the way to Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul, where some enlisted as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire. There they were respected for their loyalty and ferocity. Their presence left a profound mark on the trade and diplomacy of the era. One of their most impressive achievements was their arrival in Iceland, an uninhabited and hostile territory. Colonized by Norwegians in the 9th century, Iceland became a refuge for clans seeking independence. There, they founded a society based on oral laws and popular assemblies, the Althing, considered one of the world's first parliaments. Their culture flourished amidst ice and lava, but the Vikings did not stop there. In the late 10th century, Eric the Red sailed west from Iceland and discovered Greenland. Although inhospitable, the island allowed for small settlements that survived for centuries. His descendants even explored further. According to Norse sagas, Leif Erikson, Eric's son, reached a fertile land called Vinland, identified today with the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. This voyage to America occurred around the year 1000 AD, almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Although these Viking settlements in the New World did not prosper for long, the fact demonstrates their ability to explore the unknown. It was not an act of mass conquest, but of curiosity and ambition. Leif is remembered as the Lucky, a well-deserved title. In addition to exploring, the Vikings actively traded. They carried furs, honey, iron, amber, and slaves, and obtained spices, silk, silver, and weapons. From the Baltic to Baghdad, they left their mark on crucial trade routes. Their settlements served as strategic exchange points. They were both sailors and impromptu diplomats, capable of adapting to any culture. Viking navigation also depended on their knowledge of the environment. Although they did not use compasses, they employed the sun, stars, watercolor, and bird flight for orientation. Some historians believe they used sunstones, crystals that helped locate the sun on cloudy days. This empirical wisdom made them unparalleled navigators for their time. The sea was a spiritual space as much as a physical one. Rituals were performed before setting sail, offerings to the gods to ensure favorable winds. Sailors believed in ocean creatures, in signs in the clouds, and in prophetic dreams. Traveling by sea was not only a material risk, but also an encounter with the sacred. In every wave, destiny was read. Viking sagas are full of tales of storms, sea, monsters, and divine visions. These stories reflect the deep connection between the Vikings and the ocean. For them, every journey was an odyssey. Distance did not deter them. Neither fear of the abyss nor the lack of maps. Their spirit was one of constant discovery, and their compass, the will to go further. The Viking Age was also an age of exploration. Without nautical academies or detailed maps, these men of the North sailed further than almost any other civilization of their time. They were not content with the known. They sought new worlds, crossed natural borders, and touched lands that others did not even know existed. Thus, the navigators of the world's end earned the respect of history. Chapter 4. Myths and Rituals. Viking worldview was deeply intertwined with their gods and myths. There was no separation between the sacred and the mundane. Every action, from planting to dying in battle, was influenced by divine forces. The Norse pantheon offered a universe full of drama, valor, betrayal, and destiny. Odin, the Allfather, was the god of wisdom, war, and death. He had sacrificed one of his eyes to gain eternal knowledge. He traveled through the 9 worlds mounted on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, and accompanied by ravens who informed him of everything. He was feared and revered equally, a symbol of sacrifice and power. Thor, Odin's son, was the protector of humanity. God of thunder, he wielded the hammer Mjolnir, which destroyed enemies and returned to his hand. He traveled in a chariot pulled by goats and was invoked to protect clans from giants and disasters. His robust figure represented brute strength, valor, and justice. Loki, the god of chaos and deception, was an ambiguous figure, cunning and changeable. Sometimes he helped the gods, other times he betrayed them. His role in Ragnarok, the end of the world according to Norse mythology, was central. Loki symbolized the uncontrollable, the unpredictable, and served as a reminder that even the gods could not escape destiny. Freya was the goddess of love, beauty, and war. Unlike other traditions in Viking culture, divine women played an active role. Freya received half of the warriors killed in combat, sharing that task with Odin. She was also a powerful sorceress linked to the art of cider, feminine magic. The Viking universe was composed of 9 worlds united by Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life. At the top was Asgard, home of the gods. In the middle, Midgard, the world of humans. And below, Helheim, the realm of the dishonored dead. Each world had its inhabitants, rules, and unique landscapes described in detail in the sagas. Valhalla was the Hall of the Fallen, where warriors chosen by the Valkyries trained for Ragnarok. It was not an eternal paradise, but a preparation for the last great battle. Eating, drinking, and fighting were the rewards of an honorable death. Going to Valhalla was the greatest achievement for a Viking. Religious rituals were celebrated outdoors, in sacred groves or near ancient stones. The blot was the most common ceremony, in which animal sacrifices, or on rare occasions human sacrifices, were offered to the gods. These rituals sought fertility, protection, and victory. Blood was considered to carry sacred power. The Godi and Völvas were important religious figures. The Godi was the male priest who guided ceremonies and maintained oral tradition. The Völva, for her part, was a wise woman, often a seer, who practiced magic and offered visions of the future. Both figures were respected and feared for their connection with the divine. Runes also played a ritual role. They were symbols charged with power, used not only for writing but for divination and protection. They were carved on weapons, tombs, and amulets, each with a specific meaning. The runic alphabet, the Futhark, was considered a gift from the gods, particularly from Odin. Viking festivities were tied to the seasons. Yule, in midwinter, celebrated the rebirth of the sun and the hope of the new year. The arrival of spring was honored with planting rituals. The agricultural and religious calendars merged into celebrations full of feasts, fire, and music. Although many Vikings eventually adopted Christianity, their ancestral mythology never entirely disappeared. Sagas continued to narrate divine deeds, symbols were preserved, and rituals adapted. Even today, the Viking spiritual legacy lives on in literature, popular culture, and the memory of the peoples of the North. Chapter 5. Raids and Legendary Conquests. The history of the Vikings cannot be understood without their famous raids. For centuries, their longships cut through the waters to attack coasts, plunder cities, and leave an indelible mark. They did so not out of simple violence, but out of necessity, ambition, and opportunity. These campaigns marked the beginning of a new era in Europe. The first documented attack was in 793 AD, when the Vikings ravaged the monastery of Lindisfarne in England. This event caused horror among Christians who were unprepared to face such brutality. Monks were killed, enslaved, or forced to flee, and the temple's treasures were taken north. From then on, the name Viking evoked terror. Monasteries were ideal targets, rich in gold, isolated, and poorly defended. Viking tactics were simple but effective: arrive at dawn, attack with speed, and disappear before help arrived. This formula was repeated throughout the Atlantic coast, from Scotland to France. The sea was their highway, and fire their signature. One of the most impactful episodes was the sack of Paris in 845 AD, led by the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. With a fleet of over 100 ships, he sailed up the River Seine to reach the French capital. King Charles the Bald failed to stop them, and ended up paying an enormous tribute in silver. This humiliation marked a turning point in European defense. In Ireland, the Vikings founded permanent bases like Dublin, which became a key commercial and military center. From there, they organized new expeditions and controlled important river routes. Although initially invaders, over time they settled, built fortresses, and formed alliances. Conquest transformed into a lasting presence. England was one of the most coveted territories. For years, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fought to resist Viking invasions. The most famous conflict was against the Great Heathen Army, a coalition of Norse clans that invaded in 865 AD. Their objective was not just to plunder, but to conquer and govern. Many local leaders were defeated or forced to cede territory. In 878 AD, Alfred the Great achieved a key victory at the Battle of Edington, which led to a peace treaty and the creation of the Danelaw. This region in eastern England came under Viking control, with its own laws and customs. Still, tension between the peoples never entirely disappeared. War gave way to a wary coexistence. Not all raids were successful. On some occasions, the Vikings encountered fierce resistance. In Galicia, Spain, they were repelled by local nobles. In Constantinople, the imposing walls prevented them from conquering the city, although many ended up serving as elite Byzantine military. Defeat did not stop them. They learned and returned. In the 10th century, Canute the Great achieved what many had attempted without success: to unify the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and England under his crown. His empire was ephemeral, but showed the extent of Viking power. They were no longer just raiders, but kings, lawmakers, and nation builders. Violence had opened the door to political dominance. The impact of these conquests was profound. They changed social structure, introduced new trade routes, and blended cultures. Many Norse words were integrated into local languages. Names, customs, and technologies merged over time, leaving a lasting legacy. The sword paved the way for cultural exchange. Europe learned to defend itself. Castles, walls, and armies were reorganized to curb future raids. Kings began to strengthen their realms in the face of constant fear. However, the damage was already done. Medieval security had been broken. The Vikings forced the continent to evolve militarily and politically. Viking conquests were not only brutal, but also strategic. With a mix of audacity, intelligence, and brutality, they achieved what many empires could not. Their history of blood, fire, and transformation lives on in legends, sagas, and documents. Thus, the darkest and most fascinating chapters of the Viking Age were written. Chapter 6. Vikings in distant lands. Far from being simple Norse pirates, the Vikings extended their presence across vast regions, from the Atlantic to the Caspian Sea. In their voyages, they not only conquered but founded colonies, negotiated treaties, and mingled with other cultures. These incursions and settlements marked the history of Europe, Asia, and beyond. Their legacy is felt even in places where few would imagine: their footprint. One of the most important destinations was England. After decades of raids, many Vikings chose to settle permanently. They founded cities, married local women, and formed new mixed generations. Dublin, York, and other cities were key commercial centers controlled by Danes and Norwegians. These communities influenced Anglo-Saxon politics, language, and culture. In France, Viking attacks culminated in an unexpected agreement. In 911 AD, King Charles the Simple granted lands to a Viking leader named Rollo. In exchange, he converted to Christianity and defended the region against other invaders. Thus was born the Duchy of Normandy, whose name comes from Northmen. From this mixture emerged influential figures like William the Conqueror. To the east, the Swedes, known as Varangians, explored the rivers of Russia and Ukraine. They founded trading posts that would later become cities like Kiev and Novgorod. These Vikings, called Rus, gave Russia its name, integrated with Slavic peoples, and left a lasting mark on the region's political structures. On their river routes south, the Varangians reached Constantinople, where they caused fear but also respect. The Byzantine emperor recruited many as part of his personal guard. The Varangian Guard, composed almost exclusively of Vikings, became an elite force known for its unwavering loyalty. They fought in campaigns across Asia Minor, Sicily, and the Mediterranean. Contacts with the Muslim world were also frequent. Via the Black Sea and land routes, the Vikings traded with Arab caliphates. Islamic coins were found in Norse tombs, proof of the reach of their trade relations. They exchanged furs, honey, and slaves for silver, spices, and luxurious textiles. This trade connected the cold north with the desert sands. Beyond commerce, some Vikings became mercenaries in distant lands. Their reputation as disciplined warriors opened doors for them in foreign courts. Some records mention them fighting in Persia and the Caucasus. They were not mere invaders. They were men who knew how to adapt and profit from every encounter. In Scotland and the Hebrides Islands, the Vikings left a profound genetic and cultural influence. They settled, coexisted with Celtic peoples, and formed unique cultural hybrids. Names, legends, and local customs still bear traces of that coexistence. Even some defensive structures were adapted from the Viking style. Iceland was one of the most successful colonies. With no indigenous populations to contend with, Norse settlers founded a society based on laws and assemblies. Many of the sagas we know today were written there. In that inhospitable environment, an extraordinary literary culture flourished that preserved the oral memory of the Viking world. Greenland was also explored and colonized by Eric the Red and his followers. Despite the extreme climate, farms and communities were established that survived for centuries. Archaeological remains still reveal details of that solitary and challenging life. From there, some ventured even further to North America. The settlements in America, especially in Vinland, were brief but historic. Although contacts with indigenous peoples were tense, the mere fact of having reached there is a testament to the Viking exploratory spirit. Leif Erikson was the first European to set foot on those lands centuries before Columbus. History remembers him as a symbol of audacity and vision. In distant lands, the Vikings did not just plunder, they transformed. They brought their language, religion, social structure, and technology. In many cases, they adapted to local cultures, forged alliances, and founded new lineages. Their passage through the world was brief in years, but profound in its mark. Thus, they conquered, without needing empires, places that others never dreamed of reaching. Chapter 7. Daily life in the Norse clans. Beyond the battlefields and sea routes, the Vikings led an intense and structured daily life. Norse society was organized into family clans united by ties of blood and loyalty. Each member had a defined role, and cooperation was key to surviving in cold and hostile lands. The daily routine was marked by work, seasons, and honor. Viking dwellings were long and rectangular, built with wood, peat, and stone. The gabled roof protected against wind and snow. In the center, a hearth provided heat and light, while side benches served as beds. The house was also a workshop, kitchen, and meeting place. Everyone shared the same space, including animals in winter. Food was simple but energetic. Fish, pork, barley, milk, and vegetables formed the basis of their diet. They preserved food with salt, smoking, or drying. They also brewed beer and mead, common beverages in celebrations. Eating was a family act where stories were told and clan bonds were reinforced. Agricultural work was fundamental. They sowed oats, hay, and flax in warmer months and harvested before the first frosts. Women cared for animals, spun wool, and wove sturdy fabrics. Men built, hunted, and trained for combat. Even children participated from a young age, learning trades and traditions. Viking women enjoyed more freedom than in other medieval cultures. They could inherit lands, manage homes, and in some cases divorce. Some even took up arms like the Skjaldmare, warrior women mentioned in the sagas. In the home, their authority was indisputable. The key to the family chest hung from their belt as a symbol of power. Childhood was lived with responsibility from very early on. Boys were taught to fight, navigate, and hunt. Girls learned to weave, heal wounds, and maintain the house. There was no prolonged childhood as today. Adulthood came with the first serious tasks. Law was an essential part of daily life. Disputes were resolved in assemblies called things, where all freemen could participate. There, punishments, inheritances, and communal decisions were debated. Respect for one's word and collective judgment was vital. An unresolved crime could lead to bloody vengeance. The seasons marked the rhythm of life. In summer, they worked intensely and prepared expeditions. Winter was a time for introspection, saga narration, and religious rituals. Life was cyclical and dependent on the natural environment. The relationship with the earth and climate was one of constant respect and adaptation. Craftsmanship flourished in the clans. They fabricated tools, weapons, jewelry, and ritual objects. Wood, iron, bone, and amber were common materials. Every object had functional and symbolic value. Spiral designs, intertwined dragons, and knots were part of Norse visual art, a reflection of their worldview. Exchanges between clans were frequent. Alliances, weddings, and fairs were celebrated where goods were traded and information shared. These gatherings strengthened cultural unity and Viking identity. Although they could be rivals in combat, The clans recognized their common origin. Hospitality was a sacred value. Entertainment was also part of daily life. They practiced strategy games, physical competitions, and poetry recitals. Skalds were poets who recited the exploits of heroes and gods. Their presence in noble households was a sign of prestige. Music with lyres, drums, and horns accompanied both celebrations and rituals. Thus, the daily life of the Vikings combined hard work, strong values, and community. They were not just warriors. They were farmers, artisans, fathers, mothers, and dreamers. In their world, every day was a battle for survival, but also an opportunity to honor their ancestors and transmit an eternal legacy. Chapter 8. The Sunset of the Northmen. As centuries passed, Viking power began to wane. The very lands that once feared their axes began to strengthen their defenses. Castles emerged in response to raids, and local armies became more organized. The element of surprise was no longer on the Northmen's side. Conversion 2. Christianity was one of the most significant factors in this change. By adopting the Christian faith, the Vikings began to leave behind their old beliefs and rituals. Churches replaced sacred groves, and crosses took the place of Thor's hammers. Over time, their mythical worldview was silenced by new dogmas. Political structures also changed. What were once warrior clans transformed into centralized monarchies. Kings like Harald Hardrada and Olaf II unified dispersed territories. With that, consolidation came the need for order, written laws, and diplomatic treaties. The era of raiding gave way to the era of the state. Harald Hardrada was considered the last great Viking. His attempt to conquer England in 1066 ended at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where he was defeated and killed. Only a few weeks later, William the Conqueror, a descendant of Norman Vikings, triumphed at Hastings. Thus, a cycle ended. The Vikings had fallen, but their legacy continued. Pressure from foreign powers also influenced. The Carolingian Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Byzantine Empire adapted quickly, ceasing to be passive victims and beginning to act with intelligence and force. Moreover, the Vikings began to be seen more as trade allies than as enemies. Conflict gave way to exchange. Trade routes underwent alterations. New economic dynamics reduced reliance on plunder. The Vikings, once audacious explorers, were forced to compete with emerging maritime powers. Expansion stalled, and colonies in Greenland and Vinland did not prosper. The Golden Age was coming to an end. Cultural fusion with other peoples diluted their original identity. In Normandy, Vikings became French. In England, they were absorbed by the Anglo-Saxons. In Russia, they mingled with Slavs. This process of integration was slow but irreversible. They were no longer feared invaders, but part of the fabric of new nations. Oral traditions also began to be lost. Sagas, once transmitted by the warmth of the eye, fire, were forgotten amidst laws, contracts, and Christian liturgy. Only in Iceland, isolated and proud, were the ancient tales preserved. There, future generations would preserve the Viking spirit in parchments and manuscripts. The loss of naval power was another clear sign of decline. Viking fleets, which once dominated seas and rivers, became scarce. Shipbuilding techniques evolved, but other peoples surpassed them. Norse vessels, though beautiful and efficient, did not withstand the test of time against foreign innovations. Climate changes also played their part. The so-called Little Ice Age made agriculture in the north more difficult. Once fertile lands became harsher, and survival demanded new methods. With fewer resources, expeditions became less viable. The focus shifted from conquest to survival. However, the end of the Vikings was not an abrupt disappearance. It was a slow transformation, an adaptation to new times. Many laid down their weapons to take up the pen, the plow, or the cross. Still, the spirit of adventure, resilience, and courage lived on. The Viking essence became a seed for other cultures. Thus ended the era of the Northmen, not with a great final battle, but with the fusion of their blood, their ideas, and their legacy into the world they helped shape. Although the roar of their oars no longer churns the seas, the echo of their footsteps still resonates in history, and there, in the depths of time, the Vikings never truly died. Chapter 9. Curiosities of the Viking World. Although the popular image of Vikings is of savage, bearded warriors with horned helmets, this idea is a modern myth. There is no archaeological evidence to prove the use of horned helmets in battle. This image was popularized in 19th century opera and art and is far removed from historical reality. The Vikings had quite advanced personal hygiene for their time. They washed regularly and used combs, tweezers, and razors for personal grooming. Some archaeological remains show that they had knowledge of perfumery and cosmetology, which contradicts the idea that they were dirty, careless barbarians. Runic writing was the writing system used by the Vikings. Runes not only served for communication, but also had magical and ritualistic meanings. Many runic inscriptions are found on commemorative stones, weapons, and jewelry, showing that writing was an important part of their culture and religion. Viking ships were not just war weapons, they were also masterpieces of naval engineering. The construction of long ships allowed for fast and safe navigation in open seas and narrow rivers. Thanks to their design, they could sail upriver and undertake deep incursions into the interior of continents, something revolutionary for their time. Contrary to popular belief, not all Vikings were men. There is evidence that some women actively participated in warfare and exploration. Remains from graves with weapons and combat equipment belong to women, which suggests that some were recognized and respected female warriors in their society. The Vikings used a varied diet that included fish, meat, cereals, fruits, and vegetables. They were also known for fermenting foods and drinks like mead. This liquor, made from honey, was highly valued in ceremonies and festivities and was part of the symbolism of hospitality and fraternity. The Viking legal system was advanced and democratic for its time. The things, or local assemblies, gathered freemen to decide laws and resolve conflicts. In these assemblies, punishments were applied and communal justice was guaranteed, showing a complex social order beyond wartime violence. Viking trade was extensive and diverse. In addition to raiding, they established trade routes that connected northern Europe with Asia and the Mediterranean. They exchanged furs, slaves, amber, and precious metals, which allowed for economic and cultural integration with different peoples and civilizations. The Vikings believed in a destiny marked by battle and heroic death. The concept of Valhalla, the paradise where fallen warriors would live eternally, motivated their bravery. This spiritual vision of combat gave them a sense of honor and sacrifice that transcended mere physical struggle. The use of tattoos by Vikings is still a debated question. Some Arab accounts describe the Norse people with tattooed skin, but there is no direct evidence in archaeological remains. However, it is probable that they used body paints or marks with tribal and spiritual meanings in war. Viking sagas, epic tales written centuries later, are a mixture of history and myth. Although they contain real facts, they are also laden with symbolism, exaggerations, and moral lessons. These narratives have been fundamental in preserving the memory and cultural identity of the Norse world. Finally, Viking impact goes beyond their military conquests. Their influence on European culture, politics, and trade laid the foundations for medieval Europe. Many current countries retain names, traditions, and legends that originated in that era of profound adventures and changes. Chapter 10. The Eternal Legacy of the Vikings. Although their era ended centuries ago, the footprint of the Vikings remains alive in world history. Their bravery, navigation, and indomitable spirit left a lasting echo. In many European countries, their blood still runs in the veins of millions. They were not just invaders, but also shapers of national identities. Surnames, customs, and words of Norse origin still resonate in modern languages. In England, many place names come from Old Norse. Words like sky, egg, or window have Viking roots. The Anglo-Saxon language was shaped by centuries of Scandinavian presence. In Normandy, France, descendants of Norse Vikings became powerful dukes. From there emerged William the Conqueror, who invaded England in 1066. Thus, a Viking lineage sat on the English throne. This chain of events forever changed European history. In the East, the Varangian Vikings founded dynasties in Russian lands. The word Russia is believed to come from Rus, a name given to these warrior navigators. Rurik, a Viking chieftain, founded the dynasty that would rule for centuries. From Scandinavia, his descendants spread to Kiev and beyond. Viking artistic heritage also endures. Their geometric designs, intertwined dragons, and endless knots adorn tattoos, jewelry, and modern banners. Viking art has even influenced pop culture, video games, and modern literature. What was once a symbol of faith and power continues to inspire creativity. Interest in Vikings has resurfaced in books, series, and museums. Works like Vikings or The Last Kingdom have rekindled curiosity about their world. Although some dramatizations exaggerate or romanticize, many also educate. Thanks to them, new generations approach their legacy. Museums in Oslo, Copenhagen, and Stockholm preserve real longships, weapons, and everyday objects. These pieces impress not only with their age, but also with their functional and aesthetic design. They are living testaments to an advanced civilization. Standing before them, one feels the presence of the ancient navigators. Viking women, once forgotten, are now powerfully rediscovered. Modern archaeology has revealed that many played key roles in society. Some were clan leaders, traders, or warriors. Their story is being told with justice and admiration. In Iceland, the Viking spirit is preserved with pride. Their sagas, written on medieval parchments, are still read today. The Icelandic language has changed very little since then. There, the connection with ancestors is more than a tradition. It is part of the national soul. The Viking ethic of honor, bravery, and exploration inspires those who seek to push limits. Their determination in the face of the unknown serves as a model for entrepreneurs, travelers, and dreamers. The modern Viking may not sail in a longship, but pursues goals with the same passion. Their legacy transcends time, and even in spirituality, many today seek to reconnect with ancient Norse values. Runes, rituals, and stories of gods remain alive in communities that honor nature and ancestral wisdom. In a fast-paced world, the Viking legacy offers deep and firm roots. Thus, although the roar of their oars may have faded, the Vikings remain present in blood, in art, in language, and in the human spirit. Their deeds continue to be recounted and their memory honored in every corner of the world. May their legacy live on, eternally sailing the seas of history.